Do you know what it sounds like when a man realizes his lawn is dying? It's not a scream, it's more like a whimper. Strangled by disbelief, I can still hear Mr. Hensley's voice that day. Muffled behind his pristine white fence, the hose still running as muddy water streamed down his driveway. The emerald perfection he worshipped had turned into a patchwork of decay overnight. I was sipping my coffee on the porch when I saw him collapse to his knees, soil clinging to his palms like guilt. I didn't look away. After all, this was my doing. It started 3 months before that morning, long before the Beatles came. At the time, I thought I was just being a good neighbor, cordial smiles, polite nods, the occasional wave across the hedgerow. But behind that neighborly mask, something had already begun to fester. You see, Mr. Hensley wasn't cruel in the way people think of cruelty. He was worse, he was smug. Every weekend, he'd strut across his yard in those ridiculous cargo shorts, brandishing his leaf blower like a scepter, lording over his kingdom of Kentucky bluegrass. And every time my mower sputtered or a weed dared to peek through my fence, he'd say, "You really ought to take better care of your lawn, son. Property values depend on it." The first few times, I laughed it off. He was old, retired, probably lonely. But then came the letters. Handwritten, folded neatly, dropped in my mailbox like they were official. Warnings from the HOA even though we didn't have one. The first said, "Your dandelions are spreading. Please handle it before they reach my property." The second warned, "Your irrigation schedule is inconsistent. It's affecting the soil on my side." The third wasn't even a warning, it was a demand. "You must edge your sidewalk weekly." Unkempt borders reflect poorly on the neighborhood. I tried to be civil. I really did. I even invited him over for a beer once, hoping to ease the tension. He declined with a chuckle, said he didn't drink domestic swill. I remember standing there, bottle sweating in my hand, watching him walk back to his perfect lawn. His sprinklers hissed in rhythm, like a serpent's whisper, and I realized something. This wasn't about grass. This was about control. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of his sprinklers kept echoing in my headpiece, still like a metronome, counting down to something inevitable. I started researching lawn pests out of curiosity. Just curiosity. That's how it always begins, right? Google searches at 2 a.m. Lawn diseases, soil acidity, grub infestations. I found forums full of desperate homeowners, people who'd lost battles against unseen enemies in their turf. But one post caught my eye. Japanese beetles ruined my yard in a week. Nothing kills them all. I remember whispering it aloud. Japanese beetles. The words rolled off my tongue like an idea that had been waiting to be born. I clicked through link after link, reading about how they devoured roots underground, how they could spread through a neighborhood, how hard they were to contain once they took hold. I closed my laptop and stared at the ceiling, the faint hum of the sprinklers still leaking through my window. The next day, I stopped by Hensley's place under the pretense of borrowing a rake. He smiled, that tight, condescending smile, the one that made you feel small just for existing near him. His lawn was a carpet of perfection, the kind of green you only see on golf courses and screensavers. The smell of fertilizer hung heavy in the air. "Gorgeous day, isn't it?" he said. "Best time to aerate. Keeps the roots healthy. You should try it, might help your patchy spots." I wanted to drive that rake straight into his chest. Instead, I smiled. "Yeah, I'll give it a shot." That evening, I drove to towns over to a little nursery that didn't ask many questions. The owner was this old woman with soil-stained hands and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes in a storm. "Premier escabeau bénéfice, something to help control grubs in Marden." She nodded and brought out a small cardboard box labeled Papillia japonicus responsibly. Inside, a dozen glistening beetles shifted beneath the mesh. "Careful with those," she warned, bagging the box. "They don't stay where you put 'em. Once they settle in, they spread." "Good," I said. For the next week, I prepared. I watched Hensley's routine. Early mornings, trimming edges with surgical precision. Afternoons, watering in neat intervals. Evenings, patrolling his yard with a flashlight, checking for imperfections. He was obsessive, but predictable. His compost bin sat near the fence, tucked behind a hedge of rose bushes he'd pruned into perfect domes. That was my entry point. The night I did it, the moon hung low and orange, the kind of sky that makes everything feel heavier. I moved quietly, the box trembling, in my hands. You wouldn't think beetles could make noise, but they did soft scratching, like whispers in a jar. I reached over the fence, opened the lid, and tilted the box into his compost heap. They fell like dark seeds into the rot and moisture. When the last one crawled free, I closed the lid and walked away. The next morning, nothing seemed different. His lawn was still immaculate, his smile still smug. But I knew the roots were under siege. Every day after that, I watched the change. Tiny brown patches began to appear, subtle at first. Like Buison, asterisk, formatted 9 words per line. Asterisk, asterisk, do you know what it sounds like when a man realizes his lawn is dying? It's not a scream, it's more like a whimper, strangled by disbelief. I can still hear Mr. Hensley's voice that day, muffled behind his pristine white fence. The hose still running as muddy water streamed down his driveway. The emerald perfection he worshipped had turned into a patchwork of decay overnight. I was sipping my coffee on the porch when I saw him collapse to his knees, soil clinging to his palms like guilt. I didn't look away. After all, this was my doing. It started 3 months before, that morning, long before the beetles came. At the time, I thought I was just being a good neighbor, cordial, smiles, polite nods, the occasional wave across the hedgerow. But behind that neighborly mask, something had already begun to fester. You say, oh, Mr. Hensley wasn't cruel, in the way people think of cruelty. He was worse, he was smug. Every weekend, he'd strut across his yard in those ridiculous cargo shorts, brandishing his leaf blower like a scepter, lording over his kingdom of Kentucky bluegrass. And every time my mower sputtered or a weed dared to peek through my fence, he'd say, you really ought to take better care of your lawn, son. Property, values depend on it. The first few times, I laughed it off. He was old, retired, probably lonely, but then came the letters. Handwritten, folded neatly, dropped in my mailbox like they were official warnings from the HOA even though we didn't have one. The first said, your dandelions are spreading. Please handle it before they reach my property. The second warned, your irrigation schedule is inconsistent. It's affecting the soil on my side. Asterisk and so on for the rest of the narrative. Do you want me to continue formatting the full text this way? Asterisk green skin. He noticed. Of course. I saw him crouching, inspecting, muttering. Then came the lawn treatments, the frantic calls to pest control, the late night floodlights as he dug small holes searching for the cause. A week later, I heard him shouting, they're everywhere! Goddamn beetles! His voice cracked like dry wood. I stepped outside, pretending concern. Everything all right? Bill, they're eating my roots, he said, panting. I called 3 companies. None of them can stop it. He looked at me like a man, betrayed by nature itself. That's rough, I said, sipping my coffee. Maybe you overwatered. His eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering behind. The panic, but it didn't matter. The damage was already done. Within 2 weeks, the once perfect Emerald Kingdom turned into a mottled wasteland. He tried everything, pesticides, new sod, even flamethrower, with control. I watched it all, day after day, his despair deepening like the color of his soil. He stopped waving, stopped smiling. Sometimes I'd see him standing motionless at the edge of his yard, hose dangling from his hand, the water pooling uselessly at his feet. That's when I started to feel, it not guilt, but something close. A hollow ache that felt like satisfaction's shadow. I'd won, hadn't I? But as I watched him crumble, I couldn't help wondering if maybe I'd invited something else into the neighborhood, something hungrier than beetles. Something living beneath the surface of both. Our lives, feeding on envy and resentment. Still, when I heard the sound of his whimper, that morning, the soft, broken noise of a man watching his world die, I didn't move to comfort him. I just whispered Papy Kailante and Première my lead, because as mine was green and he stopped mowing his lawn after that. For the first time since I'd moved into the neighborhood of his house, a forgotten relic of his former reign. Days turned into weeks, and I watched from my window as the chaos spread brown, creeping into yellow, yellow collapsing into grey. The beetles had done their work with surgical precision. You could almost mistake it for poetic justice. But there was something about the silence that followed that unsettled me. It was to clean, to total. Even the birds avoided his yard now. His roses, once his pride and joy, had begun to wilt, the petals turning brittle, curling in on themselves like burned paper. Sometimes, at night, I'd swear I could hear faint clicking noises coming from that direction small. Rhythmic, like hundreds of tiny teeth grinding beneath the soil. I told myself it was just the sprinklers. Except, of course, he'd stopped using those too. About a month after the first infestation signs, I saw the for sale sign appear on his lawn. Prime property, it read in bold red letters, though the irony was almost cruel. Hensley stood beside it, hollow-eyed, his once tidy hair sticking up in uneven tufts. Première welke dove. Kofinand, feigning ik Bill. I asked. He didn't answer at first. Just stared down at the withered grass, his jaw flexing as if he were chewing invisible words. Finally, he said, "They won't leave." Who? The Beatles. His voice was barely above a whisper. I've replaced the sod 3 times. Sprayed the soil with chemicals so strong I had to. Wear a respirator, but they keep coming back. It's like they asterisk, no asterisk, this land belongs to me. I sipped my coffee, hiding my smile. Nature's funny that way, I said. He looked up at me, then really looked, and I'll never forget that expression. His eyes weren't angry anymore. They were pleading. I've lived here 32 years, he said. Built this yard from nothing. Et very bladoef. Grass, every square inch of soil, it's mine. And now it's alive. It moves when I sleep. You ever seen dirt move, son? I shook my head slowly. Can't say I have. He stared at me for another long moment before turning and going back inside. That was the last time he spoke to me. A few days later, I noticed his windows stayed dark even at night. The mailbox began to overflow. Première figure. He'd left town to stay with his daughter or check into a hotel while the pest control folks handled the job. But then, one morning, I saw the conjus lightly like someone ran through me. Mais ben, petit girl. The neighborhood started talking. Someone said they heard strange noises coming from his house at night. Another swore they'd seen him digging in the yard under the moonlight, shirtless, covered in dirt. I didn't believe half of it, but part of me didn't want to check. The air around his property had changed. It smelled damp, earthy, like the inside of a compost pile. Then one evening, as I was taking out my trash, I saw movement at the base of his fence. Je sois si med. To shift, ripple even. At first I thought it was just a trick of the light, but then I saw it a single beetle crawling over the wooden slat. Its shell glistened in the porch light, emerald and gold. I stepped closer. There wasn't just one. There were dozens, maybe hundreds, pouring from the cracks. Ens in zo erg believing tide. I dropped the trash bag and stumbled backward. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it. The beetles moved with terrifying coordination, forming clusters, burrowing, resurfacing. They spread out in all directions, some crawling under my fence, others disappearing into the street. I devrus vanishing anto. The night sky. For the first time, it hit me I'd started something I couldn't control. The next morning, I called the pest control company myself. I think the infestation spread, I told them, trying to sound calm. The technician came out that afternoon, a wiry man in coveralls who smelled faintly of gasoline. He knelt, inspected the soil, and frowned. Never seen this density before. He muttered, "They're breeding fast." Something must have triggered a mass hatch. Could be temperature, humidity, or what? I asked. He looked up at me with a strange expression. Or a deliberate introduction. For a moment, I thought my heart stopped. I forced a laugh. "You mean someone put them here?" He shrugged. "Wouldn't be the first time. People get mad about property. Disputes, sabotage each other's lawns. Happens more than you'd think. I felt sweat prick the back of my neck. And what happens when they spread?" He zipped his bag shut. "They don't stop at fences. That night, I dreamed of roots twisting, pulsing veins beneath the soil, binding everything together. I saw Hensley standing in his yard, half buried up to his knees, his skin crawling with glimmering shells. When Première woke up, my sheets swelled faintly of earth. By the next week, the infestation had spread to 3 more houses. People were furious, demanding answers. Pest control. Trucks lined the street like ambulances. I watched from my porch as neighbors pointed fingers, shouting accusations. But through it all, Hensley's house remained silent. No one had seen him in days. One evening, just as the sun was setting, I decided to check. The Curiao, Clawing Atma. I crossed the dead grass and knocked on his door. No answer. I knocked again, harder. Still nothing. I tried the handle. It turned easily. Inside, the air was thick, damp, and reeking of decay. The floorboards creaked under my shoes. The living room was a mess soil, scattered across the carpet, overturned pots, dead plants lining the window. The walls shimmered, faintly, as if coated in something organic. I called out his name, but my voice felt swallowed by the silence. Then I heard it a low, rhythmic sound. From the kitchen, like something moving in the dirt. When I stepped inside, I saw the sink overflowing with soil. Roots dangled from the faucet-like veins, and at the center of the counter was an open cardboard box. The same kind I'd bought from the nursery, only now it was empty. I turned slowly toward the back door. The yard eats to the jar, yard the porch light. And there, in the middle of the lawn, was Hensley. Or what was left of him. His skin was grey, his clothes tattered, and his hands were buried deep in the soil, moving as if he were still digging. The ground around him pulsed, alive with motion. Thousands of beetles crawled over him, into him, through him. He looked up when he heard me. His mouth opened, and a single beetle crawled out from between his teeth. You did this, he said, voice muffled, distorted, but they love you now too. I ran. I didn't look back. But as I reached my porch, I heard the unmistakable rustle of wings rising from the ground, spreading outward like a storm, and in that moment, I realized what he meant. Because when I looked down at my own yard, I saw movement beneath the grass. The swalshifti. The first sign that they'd already crossed over. By morning, the ground itself seemed to breathe. The earth rose and fell in slow, pulsing motions, as though the lawns of our neighborhood had become the lungs of something vast and buried. I barely slept that night, haunted by the sound of rustling soil outside my window. Every few minutes, there'd be a faint scratching at the siding like 1,000 little fingers trying to find a way in. The news vans came first. Then the city inspectors, then the men in hazmat suits. They walked the street in formation, their boots squelching in the mud, as they placed bright orange flags around the affected yards. They spoke in hushed tones, took soil samples, snapped photos. Nobody dared step onto Hensley's property anymore. The rumor was that the foundation had cracked. That root sore, something that looked like roots had started pushing through the concrete. I watched from behind my curtains, sipping stale coffee, trying to convince myself that I was safe. But every time I looked at my own lawn, I saw the same subtle motion, the quiet heaving of the ground. As if something underneath was stretching awake. That afternoon, there was a knock on my door. It wasn't the mailman or the inspectors. It was the old woman from the nursery. Her grey hair was tied back, her face weathered but alert, eyes sharp. As glass, you bought the beetles, she said, not asking, just asterisk knowing, asterisk I froze. I don't know what you're talking about. She pushed past me, uninvited, her boots leaving faint smears of mud across my floor. Don't bother lying, son. I can smell it. Smell what? Earth that's been turned by things it shouldn't have been. She walked straight to the window, peered out at Timiad and Amanda Shondestais. You didn't just release them. You woke them. What the hell does that mean? She turned toward me, eyes gleaming with something that looked like fear wrapped in anger. Those weren't ordinary beetles. The shipment I got last spring, it wasn't right. They came from overseas, mixed with something else. Something old. I warned the distributor to destroy them. I laughed nervously, though my throat felt tight. You're saying I planted cursed bugs. She didn't smile. You planted hunger. And now, it's spreading. I wanted to tell her she was crazy, that I didn't believe in curses or hunger that crawled. But before I could, she reached into her bag and pulled out a glass vial filled with thick, black liquid. This will stop them for a while, she said. But not forever. When they finish feeding on the roots, they'll need more. More what? Her gaze locked on mine. Hosts, I didn't take the vial at first. I didn't want to. Taking up for Tati Swanti just an infection. Still, something in her eyes made me reach for it. It was warm, almost pulsing in my palm. How do I use it? I asked. She didn't answer. She just walked to the door, paused, and said, "When you." Movement. The boards under my feet buckled again. I stumbled back into the living room, heart slamming against my ribs. Something was crawling up through the cracks in the floor. I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a fireplace poker, and swung it down hard. The tip struck wood, then something soft. There was a crunch, a hiss, a faint spray of fluid that smelled like burnt sugar. Fort un moment. Then it dabbled. The board split open, and the first wave of beetles poured through. Not the shiny, harmless kind I remembered. From the nursery, these were bloated. Their shells darker, almost translucent, like something inside was still growing. They moved together, in streams, a black-green current flowing toward me. I backed up, kicking at them, swinging wildly, until my heel hit the wall. One landed on my ankle, its legs dug into my skin. I screamed and stomped down, crushing it into a smear of gold and red. But more came dozens, and over the ring of their wings, I heard again that voice. You did this. It came from outside, from the yard, from the place where the grey patch of earth still pulsed faintly. Première tournetoire. A window. Hensley, or what was left of him, was standing there. His skin was tight and pale, his eyes glossy black, his mouth twitching in slow, unnatural movements. He didn't look human anymore. His body seemed merged with the soil, tendrils of root and vine snaking up his neck, wrapping around his arms. You thought you could bury guilt, he said. But it grows. I stumbled. Backward, shaking my head. You're dead. You're not real. The thing that had been Hensley tilted its head. Neither are they. Not anymore. Behind him, the ground shifted again, a massive undulation, like something asterisk breathing asterisk beneath the surface. The earth split open. I could see it now, movement just below the layer of sod, a swirling ocean of gold and black shells, rippling outward in waves. I turned and ran for the kitchen. I needed something fire, poison, anything that killed fast. I grabbed a can of lighter fluid from under the sink, tore open a drawer, and found a box of matches. The floor behind me creaked with movement. When I turned back, the beetles were pouring from the hallway now, climbing the walls, covering the ceiling, in a chittering tide. The house itself seemed to groan under their weight. I stumbled toward the living room, splashing the fluid in white arcs across the floor. A smell. Envy. With spite. Now we feed on you. The roots surged, dragging me back. I felt something sharp pierce my ankle, then another, and another. The new creatures were climbing me, burrowing into my clothes, into my skin. The pain was blinding. I swung wildly, but there were too many. My vision blurred. The smell of rot and blood filled my mouth. En de ten. Through the haze, I saw Hensley again, his face emerging from the wall of soil, like a fossil come to life. His mouth moved, but it wasn't his voice anymore. It was asterisk, there's asterisk perfect lawns, it said, in a chorus of layered whispers. Perfect roats, perfect hosts. I screamed until my throat went raw. The fire above roared louder. The ceiling cracked, on direné, down in waves of heat and ash. I forced myself upward, fingers slipping, lungs burning. Somehow, I broke free of the roots. I crawled through the smoke, through the collapse, and out into the night air. Behind me, my house was gonna mass of flame and shadow, the roof caving inward as the ground continued to churn. I stumbled into the street, coughing, bleeding, watching as the fire spread, not just through my yard, but beneath it. The soil cracked open like a wound, glowing faintly gold beneath the flames. Neighbors screamed. Pipoleront. But even as the fire consumed everything, I saw them, flying dozens. Then hundreds of beetles rising from the smoke, wings shimmering against the burning sky. I fell to my knees on the asphalt, staring up as they scattered into the night, vanishing one by one into the darkness beyond the neighborhood. The hum faded, the world went quiet. And I realized, in that moment of silence, that the fire hadn't destroyed them. It had freed them. The lawns were gone. The houses, maybe too. But the roots were still alive. And somewhere beneath the ash, the earth was still breathing. Days passed, or maybe it was weeks. Time dissolved after the fire. The neighborhood became a wasteland of ash and smoke, cordoned off by yellow tape and guarded by men who never looked you in the eye. They wore hazmat, suits that hissed with Compressed air, their boots sinking into scorched earth that still twitched beneath their weight. I wasn't supposed to be there anymore. The evacuation order came 2 days after the fire, when they realized it wasn't just a local blaze, but something worse, something spreading underground. They said contaminants. They said unknown bioactivity. They didn't say infestation, but I could see it in their faces. I watched from the edge of the restricted zone, the bandage on my leg already soaked through. The not bites, asterisk punctures, asterisk weren't healing. The skin around them had turned dark and hard, the veins pulsing faintly beneath the surface. When I pressed my fingers to them, I could feel movement, tiny, deliberate. That night, I checked into a motel 30 miles away. The room smelled of bleach and stale cigarettes, but it was safe, or at least I told myself it was. I locked the door, pulled the curtains tight, and sat on the bed with the lights off. The silence didn't last long. At first, it was just a faint rustle coming from my duffel bag. I ignored it, assuming it was my nerves or maybe a mouse. Then the sound grew sharper, deliberate, like the clicking of claws against plastic. My heart froze. Slowly, I unzipped the bag. One beetle crawled out. Its shell shimmered in the dim motel light, green shot through with veins of gold. It wasn't large, no bigger than a coin, but it moved with purpose, its legs scraping against the fabric. It paused on the bedspread, turned toward me, and lifted its wings with a faint hiss. "No," I whispered. "No, you can't be." Here, the beetle tilted its head as if listening. Then it crawled forward, stopping at my hand. I wanted to swat it, crush it, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, staring at the way it lifted, its front legs, tapping lightly against my skin. The punctures on my leg burned. When I looked down, I saw movement beneath the bandages. The fabric bulged. A wet sound followed, soft, tearing. I ripped the gauze away and nearly vomited. The wounds weren't wounds anymore. They were asterisk openings, asterisk tiny, circular, rimmed with black, pulsing tissue. And inside, God help me inside, I could see movement. Small, writhing, shapes pressing against the surface, pushing outward. I screamed and staggered into the bathroom, grabbing the edge of the sink. My reflection looked alien, pale skin, wide eyes, sweat pouring down my face. Première tournade. On the tap, splashed water, tried to breathe. The beetle followed me. It landed on the mirror, its reflection doubling, its shell shimmering in that impossible color. I raised my hand, trembling. "What do you want from me?" It moved its mandibles, almost like it was speaking. Then the voice came not from it, but from asterisk inside me. "Asterisk, you are soil now." I fell backwards, crashing against the tub, my lungs seizing. The voice wasn't singular anymore, it was layered, countless whispers overlapping, in a sound that felt like it came from beneath my skin. My body began to ache, deep and rhythmic, like something moving inside my bones. I grabbed a knife from my bag, my old camping knife, dull and rusted. Without thinking, I slashed at the blackened skin. Around my ankle, it split open easily, too easily. The flesh parted like soft clay. And from inside spilled asterisk dozens of tiny, translucent larvae slid out, glistening with red and gold. They squirmed in the sink, some still clinging to me, others falling to the floor, with soft, wet sounds. I choked back bile and swung the knife again, screaming as more poured out. The pain was secondary to the horror, the knowledge that they'd been growing inside me all along. When it was over, I collapsed. The larvae writhed on the tile, their bodies twitching in unison. Then, slowly, they began to move not away from me, but toward I tried to crawl back, but my limbs felt heavy, sluggish, the edges of my vision dimmed. One of them reached my hand, climbed up my wrist, and disappeared beneath the skin. I could feel it moving, burrowing deeper. And then the voice returned. "They love you now too." When I woke again, the sun was rising through the motel blinds. The floor was clean. No larvae, no blood. For a moment, I thought maybe it had all been a hallucination, brought on by shock or infection. My legs still ached, but the wounds were gone, sealed completely, smooth as if they'd never existed. But the movement beneath the skin hadn't stopped. I left the motel. That morning, driving the main roads, the radio buzzed with static and fragmented news reports, containment breach, environmental hazard. Evacuation zone extended asterisk when I stopped at a gas station outside of town. The attendant gave me a strange look. You from up north? He asked. I nodded, unsure what to say. He scratched his chin. Heard they found something under the dirt up there. Not natural. They're bringing in scientists, EPA, even the military. I forced a smile. Probably just rumors. He laughed softly. Maybe, but I'll tell you one thing. Friend birds don't fly that way anymore. I looked up instinctively. The sky was clear. To clear. And then I saw its small dots moving in formation. High and distant, glinting in the sunlight. No beer. Not planes. Beetles. Thousands of them, drifting like ash across the horizon, heading south. My hands started shaking. The attendant didn't notice. He was already walking back inside. I got into the car and gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. The movement beneath my skin pulsed harder, synchronized with my heartbeat, and for the first time, I realized the truth. The fire hadn't stopped. The quarantine wouldn't either. They weren't spreading to destroy. They were migrating, and I was one of them now. When I closed my eyes, I could see it clearly, networks of roots stretching beneath the surface of the world. Connecting towns, cities, countries. The hum was everywhere, faint but growing, the song of something vast awakening. It wasn't just about lawns anymore. Ituabu. Territory, and soon everything would be green again. I drove south for days, or maybe it was only a night, stretched thin until it broke. The radio cut in and out, bursts of static, swallowing the voices of broadcasters who spoke about containment lines and soil sterilization. They made it sound bureaucratic controlled. But I could feel the vibration of the ground through the gas pedal. A low thrum that matched the rhythm inside my chest. By the fourth day I couldn't tell where my pulse ended and that other beat began. At rest stops I watched ants crawl over the asphalt and wondered if they could hear it too. Every few hours I'd see another cloud on the horizon, shimmering faintly green, shifting with the wind. The migration wasn't a rumor anymore. Étoile. Atmosphere. Somewhere outside Shreveport, I pulled into a diner that still had power. The place was nearly empty except for a trucker hunched over a plate of eggs and the waitress pouring coffee, as if the world hadn't already changed. She looked up when I walked in. You from up there? She asked. Her accent softened the edges of the words. I hesitated. Just passing through. She nodded toward the window. You should keep passing. They say the wind's carrying spores or eggs or something. Folks are leaving their gardens to die. I sat at the counter. Anyway, the coffee tasted like ash. She noticed the tremor in my hand and said quietly, You sick? Hun? I glanced down at my sleeve. Beneath the fabric, my arm twitched tiny, involuntary movements, almost like muscle, spasms, but to regular, to deliberate. Just tired, I said. The trucker laughed without looking up. Everybody's tired. You see the sky last night? Looked like the damn northern lights, only lower. They said it was insects, all the way up in the atmosphere. Billions. He stabbed a piece of toast. Whole countries turning into compost. The waitress flinched at that. Premier ped. And left without finishing the coffee. Back in the car, I rolled up my sleeves. The skin on my forearms had changed color darker, with faint, golden veins running under the surface like cracks in old glass. When I flexed my fingers, I felt resistance like something pulling from the inside. I thought about the old woman from the nursery. When you hear the ground speak, pour it where it's loudest, but the ground wasn't the only thing speaking now. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw patterned shapes moving beneath. Continents, lines of light that pulsed in rhythm with the hum. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was communication. A language I was beginning to understand. That night, I parked near an abandoned gas station and fell asleep in the driver's seat. I dreamed of Hensley's lawn, again except this time it wasn't dead. It was endless. An ocean of green stretching to the horizon, each blade of grass alive, aware, breathing in time with me. When I looked down, I realized I wasn't standing on the lawn. I was part of it. My legs sank into the soil, roots wrapping around my bones, drawing me down until all that was left above ground was my face. And if from some willow, Fidue Sagan. I woke at dawn to a tapping. Sound on the windshield. At first I thought it was rain. Then I saw them tiny beetles clinging to the glass, hundreds of them. They didn't scatter when I started the engine. They just watched. I drove through them. They burst against the glass like raindrops, leaving faint streaks of greenish fluid that shimmered for a moment before sinking into the surface. When I pulled into the next town, the streaks were somehow, like the beetles had changed it, strengthened it. Everywhere I stopped after that, I saw signs of them. Not in swarms, but in hints the wave vines grew overnight across a gas pump. The faint shimmer of gold dust on the edge of a puddle. The world was adapting. Or maybe it was being rewritten. On the 7th day, the road dipped toward the coast. I could smell the ocean, sharp and metallic. The hum inside me was louder here, resonant, as if the water amplified it. I pulled over near an empty beach and stepped out barefoot. The sand was damp, cool. When I dug my toes in, I felt the pulse steady, immense, alive. And then I heard it again. Not from within this time, but carried on the wind, a chorus. Countless voices layered together, whispering my name, David. I froze. I hadn't heard my name. Spoken aloud in days. David, the voices said again, gentle, coaxing. The sound came from the dunes ahead, where the sand shifted like something crawling beneath. I walked toward it, each step heavy, deliberate. The dunes split open. They rose from the sand, in waves millions of beetles, their shells glistening in the morning sun, forming shapes, outlines, patterns, faces, my face. The largest one stepped forward. Its wings shimmered gold. When it opened, its mandibles, the voice that came out was unmistakably human. We remember you. I couldn't speak. The air vibrated with the rhythm of their wings. The ground trembled under my feet. You freed us, they said. And now we free you. The sand erupted. Roots shot upward, wrapping around my legs. My waist, my chest. They didn't pull me under the asterisk, lifted asterisk me. My vision blurred as the world below fell away, replaced by the shimmering movement of wings. I felt something burst inside me, not pain, but release. My skin split open in clean lines, and from beneath it, light poured out, gold and green, like sap under pressure. The last thing I remember before the light swallowed everything was the hum resolving into a single word, clear and final. Grow. When I opened my eyes again, I was standing on a hill overlooking the ocean. The world below was green, not the soft, human green of lawns and gardens, but something brighter, alive. The ruins of towns were half buried under vines that shimmered in the sunlight. The air thrummed with the sound of wings. I looked down at my hands. They were no longer hands. The skin was translucent, the veins beneath pulsing faintly with golden light. When I moved, the grass around my feet bent as though bowing. Somewhere deep inside, the human part of me whispered that I should be terrified. But I wasn't. I understood now. The beetles hadn't come to destroy. They had come to asterisk continue, asterisk to reclaim what we had paved over and poisoned. And I was their first gardener. Behind me, the dune stirred again. Something vast moved beneath the sand, waiting, watching. The hum rose in unison, and I felt it echo through the marrow of the world. Soon, everything would grow. Whether we wanted it to or not. The world unfolded like a slow exhale. The wind that brushed across the new grass carried a sound not unlike language, soft, harmonic, infinite. It was the hum of the green itself, the voice of roots, of growth, of memory. Every blade sang, every leaf listened. I walked, or perhaps drifted, through the remade landscape. Et horizon was a shifting line between gold and emerald, the air alive with faint motes of light that rose from the soil, like pollen. The cities were gone, absorbed into the texture of the earth. Roads had become rivers of moss. Towers were skeletons wrapped in ivy, humming quietly as if remembering their former purpose. There was no pain anymore. No hunger, only the rhythm, the hum that had begun in my chest now resonated in everything around me. I could feel the pull of the ocean miles away, the push of sap through a forest hundreds of miles inland. I was part of the same pulse. A voice came, not from outside, not even from within, but from asterisk between. Asterisk, 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 do you see what you made? Asterisk, asterisk, I didn't mean to, I whispered. My words felt heavy. Slow, as though the air itself needed to think before carrying them. Asterisk, asterisk, intention is a seed. Asterisk, asterisk, the voice replied. Asterisk, asterisk, you planted yours well. Asterisk, asterisk, I wanted to argue, to insist it had been revenge, accident, madness. But in this new world, words like asterisk, accident, asterisk had lost their shape. Even guilt felt distant, like an artifact from a smaller life. In the distance, I saw movement, figures. At first I thought they were people, survivors maybe. But as they drew closer, I saw they were neither wholly human nor wholly earth. They were shaped from it, silhouettes of bark and vine, and something that glowed faintly beneath their skin. They walked in silence, each step coaxing new growth from the ground. One of them approached me. Its face was smooth, unreadable, yet somehow familiar. When it spoke, its voice carried Lammy, thousands of voices woven into one. Asterisk, asterisk, caretaker. The balance was broken. You have returned it. Asterisk, asterisk, by destroying everything. Asterisk, asterisk, by changing the definition of everything. Asterisk, asterisk. The figure turned its gaze toward the horizon, where the sun was rising, a pale diffused light refracting through clouds that shimmered. Garin! The sky looked alive. Life doesn't end it, said it exchanges forms. The old world was static lawns trimmed to death, roots starved for silence. Now all grows together, then what happens to us? You are us. The figure reached out a hand, a gesture, so calm, so ordinary, that for a moment I forgot what it was. When our fingers met, 1,000 images flooded. Through me, cities turning to gardens, oceans thick with luminous algae, forests knitting across continents. Humanity wasn't erased, it was rewritten into the ecosystem itself. Memory turned to pattern consciousness, diffused through root and leaf and wind. I looked down. Where my feet touched the soil, flowers were blooming pale, things that pulsed faintly. With golden light, I couldn't tell if they were growing. From me or were me. Is this forever? I asked. Nothing is forever. The figure smiled, or something like it. But this will last long enough for the world to breathe again, and then it was gone, dissolving into the air like pollen. In sunlight, I stood alone on the hill for a long time, watching the wind move through the new forests that had once been suburbs, listening to the hum that connected everything. It wasn't frightening anymore. It was steady, purposeful. Somewhere beneath the earth deep, where the roots intertwined, I could still feel the remnants of the human world, the echoes of concrete and steel, of laughter and radio waves of small, stubborn dreams. They hadn't vanished, they had been taken in, composted, reborn as something larger. I sank to my knees and pressed my hands into the soil. It was warm, pulsing gently under my palms, as though the planet itself was alive and breathing. I closed my eyes and whispered the only word that felt true anymore. Grow. The hum answered, not in words but in feeling, and the light spread. The seasons blurred into one another until even the idea of seasons lost meaning. Time was no longer measured by clocks but by the slow rhythm of germination, blossom, decay, and return. The world had learned a new way to breathe, and I had learned to listen where the old highways once cut through forest streams now wove silver threads through meadows that glowed faintly. At night the hum had softened, no longer the relentless chorus of invasion, but the deep, patient murmur of balance. I followed it to the heart of what had been our city, a place that now resembled a cathedral built by wind and vines, great arches of stone and root curved overhead. Sunlight fell through leaves like stained glass. I walked through that green sanctuary and found the old statue of a man holding a shovel, half buried in moss. It took me a moment to realize who it was meant to be. His name, my neighbor's name, was carved faintly on the base, worn smooth by rain and time. The beetles were there, too tiny, sparks crawling across the surface, tending to it like caretakers polishing a relic. I'm sorry, I said quietly. The sound didn't echo. It was swallowed by the earth and answered with a pulse that felt almost like forgiveness. The hum shifted again, wrapping around me. It wasn't angry. It was curious, tender, endless. I understood then that it had never been about vengeance or ruin. It had been about reclamation, the world correcting a long imbalance, reteaching its own language to those who had forgotten how to hear it. I knelt in the grass. The soil was cool and fragrant, alive beneath my palms. I could feel everything, the tremor of roots touching miles away, the vibration of wings above the canopy, the heartbeat of oceans, and within that vastness I felt a faint echo of what I used to be. One human voice folded into the harmony. The last trace of the old world lived there, not as a ghost, but as memory enriched. We had been gardeners once. Even in our mistakes we had sown arrogance, yes, but also wonder, and it was wonder that survived a breeze passed through the open Cathedral of trees, and I could hear words within it, simple, gentle, final. Rest now, it grows, I lay back in the grass. The sky above shimmered green, and gold alive with motion the hum deepened until it became silence, and in that silence was everything ending, and beginning intertwined the earth exhaled, once more, and I exhaled with it, and the world kept growing. Please paste your script here. I have understood your commands.